Hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of Going Nuclear with Osama. I'm joined here with a really special guest. Her name is Hannah Fenwick, and she is a co lead for the Nuclear for Climate organization. It's a delivery team representing nuclear organizations across the world at this year's COP conference, COP28, climate change conferences in the world. So excited to have you here. Welcome, Hannah.
Thanks for having me, Osama. I'm really honoured to be on your podcast, and yeah, I'm excited to tell you all about Nuclear for Climate and what we do, and why I advocate for nuclear energy at that global scale at COP. So my background is I did a STEM degree, so I studied chemistry at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, and my passion for nuclear, I fell into the industry, and I think you might find a couple of people say the same thing. So if I think back to my school days, I loved English and I loved science, and finding something to study that went into that, like that kind of analytical mind, took me into chemistry. And while I really enjoyed my degree, I thought I'll work in a lab. I'll perhaps work in pharmaceuticals, or perhaps I'll work on material science. And the idea of the nuclear industry, I didn't know we had nuclear power in the UK. I just didn't know that we did any at all. So that was my level of understanding of nuclear. And my degree included working in industry for 1 year. And while I was looking for placements, I went to a career fair. It was actually for graduates, but I snuck in and I was like, "Do you guys do industrial placements for students?" And a couple of organisations I spoke to, like, "Yep, we can have you. You can do some interesting stuff in some chemistry anywhere in the UK." And one organisation was in the nuclear sector, and I thought that's only for engineers, maybe some physicists. And they were like, "No, actually." And I went into radiochemistry, so that was the start in my career in the sector, as a student and then as a graduate in radiochemistry in the UK. And what my focus was on the back end of the nuclear fuel cycle, so on reprocessing fuel for reuse, which was something I didn't know that we could do before I went into the sector. So my passion, I always wanted to do something that bettered the planet. I think it's something like 80,000 hours of your life you're going to spend in your career. That's a long time. And I want to do a career that makes a difference. I want to day to day be combating climate change, and nuclear energy being low carbon, being one of the solutions. Um, a lot of people think about, oh, energy, charging up my phone, charging up my laptop, these like luxury things. Energy is just so essential to life, for school, for hospitals, for just society, and it's an absolute essential. And actually, 1 billion people in the world are suffering from energy poverty, and that's something we can't just ignore and say, do you know what, we're going to use less, we're going to be more efficient. And why is energy important on the climate crisis? Well, 75% of our carbon emissions comes from energy. 40% of that's electricity, and the rest is from heat and transport. We're talking about electrifying transport, we're talking about electrifying heat, we're talking about synthetic fuel, so not synthetic fuels, but alternative fuels, hydrogen, etc. And we have solutions. A lot of the climate activism is about what people don't support and what people don't like and what we shouldn't be doing. And actually, we have a lot of solutions and technologies we can use now, and nuclear energy is one of them.
What is Nuclear for Climate, right? Tell me
Yeah,
more about that. What's your role as a co-lead,
yeah.
and how has your experiences been with previous years when it comes to the COP conferences?
Nuclear for Climate. So, Nuclear for Climate is a global organization. We're a network where over 100 like nuclear societies and associations have come together, and they came together in 2015 at COP21, which was held in Paris. It started off with 15 people wearing T-shirts that said, "Let's consider nuclear. Let's talk about nuclear at COP." And it's just grown year on year. So this global and grassroots organisation from these volunteers really passionate about nuclear energy has grown now. We're into our 8th year of attending COP, and my involvement started at COP26. So I heard about COP26 being held in Glasgow, which is where I'm from. You might be able to tell from my accent. And I was like, oh my goodness, like something at home that's all about climate change. I've got to get in there. I've got to go. So I went to COP26, and the campaign was Net Zero Needs Nuclear, and it was run largely by the United Kingdom's young generation in nuclear. And that's a kind of component of the Nuclear Institute that we have in the UK. And just the energy off of all of these volunteers. Many of them I had worked with previously in like STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and maths events. Things like for school children, primary school, secondary school, parents, teachers, education things for them to explain that what nuclear energy is, what energy is. But actually seeing them explaining to people who, it's not just general public at COP, you have world leaders there. You have the opportunity to actually be speaking to policymakers and people who make decisions at that national and international scale. That was just absolutely amazing. So I volunteered just as a delegate, went along, spoke to people, wore my t-shirt, which I'm wearing just now, with "Let's talk about nuclear," and just expressing actually that we have a solution and we have this technology in our hands to use now. And we've been using it for quite a long time, since the 1950s and 60s. So Nuclear for Climate, it's run by European Nuclear Society, ENS, and the IYNC, the International Youth Nuclear Congress. But what they do each year is they select a youth team to actually deliver what we're going to do at COP. And COP is, you've said this yourself, is one of the biggest, probably the biggest climate change conference. And rather than just about its size, so last year there was about 40,000 people at COP27 in Egypt. It's about who goes there. So it's the UN Climate Change Conference. It's the UNFCCC, which is the Climate Change Convention of the UN. And that has almost a global participation. You've got 198 parties, essentially almost every country in the world has signed this convention to say, yes, we're going to collectively address the crisis of climate change and treat it like the emergency that it is and combat it. So these are the kind of people that we get to potentially speak to and to influence. And it's all run by youth as well. So as co-lead, you've also had a podcast session with Vishesh, and Vishesh is co-lead for COP28 this year alongside me. And what's just great is we have this international team. I think we have 27 or 28 people in our team, and they're from all over the world. We have 19 countries represented in those individuals, and they come from all different perspectives, from countries without nuclear, from countries with very established nuclear, and from newcomer nuclear countries. And some of them work in the sector. They're engineers and they're scientists, and some aren't. Some work completely in a separate sector, but they're just passionate about making sure that there are solutions being used in our lifetime so we have a better tomorrow.
So that's a great overview of your experiences and kind of how you got involved. And I can definitely tell that you are from Glasgow, right? So
Yeah.
so from that Glasgow, the conference that took place in Glasgow, what do you think were some of the lessons learned and some of the successes that you'd like translated into this year's COP 2 years later?
So while we've been around since 2015, COP21 in Paris, Glasgow was the first time that Nuclear for Climate had we say physical presence. People were physically there before, but like a booth or pavilion. You go into this area and there are really beautiful large pavilions of countries and also NGOs, so non-government organisations and groups like us advocating. We had a physical presence, as in a booth, that people could come and speak to us. So this was really useful for actually having the word nuclear really big. And at COP26, people walked past, and my interaction with them was they would like double take, and they'd say, why are you here? What's nuclear got to do with climate change? And a little bit of like accusation, kind of, why are you here? Then COP27. So COP27, I was co-lead for the delivery team last year as well. And COP27 was held out in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And the conversation was entirely different. And I think that this reflects that people have energy security much more heightened in their minds due to the geopolitical scenario that we're in now. And they've realised that actually we need to rely on alternative sources of energy and electricity across the world. And they're saying, nuclear for climate. So how does nuclear benefit combating climate change? So the conversation in the space of 12 months, has completely changed. And the successes that we had from COP26 and COP27 is massive media interaction with the likes of New York Times, the BBC, so British broadcasting, with the Forbes, with Reuters. And this is from TV interviews on national TV, This is with podcasts like yours and many others, and also written articles in lots of different languages and lots of different national press across the world, where we're talking about nuclear, but we're also talking about the youth voice that says, well, we hear, oh, follow the science, follow the data. We say, we're the scientists, we've got the data, and we're these young people that we're working for the rest of our working lives in this sector, and we want to have a clean energy future. So, listen to us, speak to us, ask your questions, and people are definitely listening. And in fact, I think that the perception that nuclear is perhaps not favoured, I think when you get to COP and when you speak to people in public and you look at the statistics, it's much more accepted than you think. But it just doesn't seem to be spoken about very much on a public level. So we're trying to address that and say we really need people to be, the word nuclear to be used in people's homes, in the living rooms quite regularly, so that they understand that it's something they can ask questions about, they can speak about, and they can consider it.
Yeah, it's great. That's great that your approach is that youth-centric approach, right? Because we are the future, right? We are the ones that are going to be inheriting the industries, right? And responsibilities of our predecessors. So tell me a bit about that when it comes to a youth-led initiative and an industry which is typically seen as very old school and kind of ancient. What type of response do you get from the energy ministers and government representatives that come out to COP?
Yeah, some of the perhaps more negative interactions with people when they see us, because we don't meet their imagined persona of a nuclear professional. I think there's a little bit of identity when it comes to I'm an environmentalist, and there's an image that comes to people's minds, how they identify, and nuclear is usually not part of that. And for everybody that's in the nuclear sector, you speak to anybody about it, you scratch the surface, and actually it's about the planet, it's about environment, it's about climate change, it's about clean energy, and a lot of the time it's about the interest in science and engineering as well, of course. For people that would look at us and go, oh, the one woman accused me of being an actress, and I was like, oh, that's lovely. It would be great if I was an actress. I'm doing a great job. But there's this shock of young people, perhaps young women, speaking about nuclear energy. A little bit of people were taken aback. But beyond that, I think that people really are listening to the youth. You look at organisations like Youngo, who's the UN youth group, youth NGO. They are speaking up at COP. You have, Greta Thunberg and many other amazing young people who are saying we're not going to tolerate this. We have no choice but to inherit the legacies that have been handed to us from even my generation now are creating these legacies. So we need to handle them, and we inherit them from those before us, and we have a responsibility to do much better. One person had said that we don't have, this is a negative comment from an individual, that we don't have the consent of future generations to deal with nuclear material in the future. And for us, well, we have never been asked, for our consent to deal with this climate crisis, with this emergency. And it is not something that is in the future hundreds of years away. It is now, we're dealing with it right now. And actually, we don't have any other choice but to handle it. And we have technologies and solutions, but that in fact the generation before us could have been brave enough to choose and to build and to finance and to invest in, and they haven't. So we just have to go, no, we're not tolerating this. We need more technology, more energy that is clean, and we need to absolutely stop this reliance on fossil fuels while also allowing clean development. And when we're speaking to world leaders, so COP is the most bizarre situation you'll find yourself in. You just see, a president walking past you with a team of people, and you're really interested to get some of their time. Last year at COP27, in fact, COP26, I was very upset I didn't get to see the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. She's now left being First Minister, but she was still First Minister at COP27. Now, I'm from Glasgow, she's from Glasgow. I was in COP, for 5 days and never bumped into her. Everybody else did except me. And then at COP27, I'm a very proud Scotswoman. I was wearing a saltire, which is the St Andrew's cross. It's our flag, on my back like a cape, walking around COP. And someone said, "Oh, you've just missed the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon." And I said, "Oh, you're joking. Oh, no, like, I can't believe I missed her. This happened to me last year. I didn't get to see her." And went back over to the Nuclear for Climate stand and was complaining that I'd missed seeing her. And this person came up to me 10 minutes later, tapped me on the shoulder, said, do you want to meet her? I was like, yes. And she was actually in a bilateral meeting with Pakistan at the time. And once she was finished with that meeting, I was speaking to her press team before, and they said, "Yeah, like, let's meet her. She's seen you. You walked past her so quickly we couldn't stop you, but she's seen you and she's seen your flag." So I met with her, and actually the Scottish government that's in at the moment is the Scottish National Party. They're so far they've been against nuclear new build in Scotland. And I just asked her about that position, why, and what would change her position, and expressing to her what would change your mind to select something that's the low carbon solution. And her concerns, straight away, she said, "Well, we're not concerned about the safety, we know it's safe." I thought this is a lot of progress from how people, perhaps particularly the politicians, might say things that they believe the public believe, which in fact, if you look at the data, isn't true. They do support nuclear. She said, "Well, what we're concerned about is how will we handle the waste and how much will it cost?" And I thought, do you know what? We are starting in the middle of the conversation again. So this is the difference. If I had spoke to her at COP26, I don't think I'd have had that more positive interaction with her that I did at COP27. And definitely them saying that we're not all like one look, we're not all one people in the nuclear sector really helps. People can connect with people that they relate to, whether that's someone from their country or from a country closer to them, from a country that is non-nuclear. So they can actually ask, well, why would I consider this as a non-nuclear country to consider new nuclear? And we have lots of volunteers who are like, well, I've studied nuclear engineering in a non-nuclear country. I don't have an industry to go into, but it interests me and I'm passionate about it. And actually, them having their perspective is much more important than someone from an established nuclear country who can't have that perspective trying to explain why you should do it when they've got a 50-year industry with all that legacy. It's like, well, actually, why don't we ask the people that know that perspective to explain that to their ministers? That was something that was really interesting, really widened my perspective when I went to COP27.
That one-to-one dialogue that can make a difference in your country's, in Scotland's future, energy future. So I think that's a really cool example of I guess one of the highlights from your time there. What would you say are some of the other highlights that really come to mind when it comes to the event itself, and maybe your experiences working with advocates and professionals from around the world? Tell me a bit about that.
It's just amazing to learn from other people who have their passion and their area of interest and their area of knowledge. They have a really deep knowledge of something, and you can just see their passion. You can learn so much from them. I really enjoy that. And a couple of other highlights. So I can't remember the gentleman's name, but there was someone who just came up to our pavilion, our booth, and said, I'm the UN ambassador to Kenya, and I'm also on the UN Security Board. Tell me about nuclear. And in fact, I stepped back at that point and let colleagues much more experienced on nuclear security, non-proliferation and safeguards to speak to him. And they had a great conversation. They sat there for 35 minutes. This is an important person, with lots of things on their agenda. They're rushing from meeting to meeting with our other world leaders. And they sought us out to ask us actually their questions, which was just absolutely amazing. And then sitting back and listening to young people who perhaps I've been speaking with on Google Teams, on Zoom, every month, and we're talking about doing fun things at COP, like dressing up in polar bear costumes and dancing in the street and doing, fun activities that get a lot of media attention, actually really lean into their expertise and really do that. Like, you're influencing someone who has massive influence. You're influencing someone who can make a change today or in the next couple of years that will have a massive impact on the climate and on energy and on development and the just transition. And I think we need to really remember the word just in this energy transition. And other highlights. So kind of a sector highlight was meeting the Director General of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi. He's really supportive of what we're doing. And, the IAEA has this UN authority, voice to speak on nuclear at a global scale. And one of the events that we organised, and we collaborate a lot with the IAEA, and they very kindly share their event space with us. they We had a panel session, and instead of perhaps young people being asked to moderate or chair and ask questions of people with many more years experience and wisdom, we flipped the script, and the panelists were all younger people in their earlier careers, and Raphael Grossi was questioning them and kind of grilling them, which I'm sure he enjoyed. And we also had some of his time where in his calendar, again very busy, he came across to our pavilion, and he said he was so proud of what we were doing, that we beat him to it. I loved when he explained this. He said at COP26, you guys all had a pavilion, a booth, stand, before we did as IAEA. As IAEA had a really beautiful large pavilion at COP27, and they're very generous with sharing that space with us and actually amplifying the youth voice as well, which is really great. So it's great to have that kind of support at that level.
Phenomenal. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Rafael Grossi. He is definitely a very influential figure, and it's great to see that the Nuclear for Climate was able to leverage that connection, right?
Yeah.
So that's definitely a really cool highlight. Tell me a bit about this year. This year in Dubai, this conference is being held, and as we know, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, has deployed 1,400 megawatt units, one of the largest clean energy projects in the world, right? And very successful on budget projects, Baraka Station, which is one of the world's largest nuclear power plants. Tell me about Nuclear for Climate presence in a country which is a new adopter of nuclear, which there aren't many in the world. Tell me about your feel for this conference being held in this country.
So I'm really excited. At COP27, we walked around all of the national pavilions, and we had a focus on looking at the nuclear countries. And we were thinking for the United Kingdom, for France, for the States, for Canada. What did they do about nuclear? Did they talk about it? Did they have any information at their pavilion about it? And actually, the only country who had a permanent mention about nuclear was the UAE pavilion, which had an explanation of all of the different low carbon energy technologies that they have in their country, and particularly it pointed out the Baraka nuclear power plant, which 3 of their 4 reactors are fully online. And by the end of the time that it's developed, it will produce, I think, 20% of the nation's energy, which is just absolutely fantastic. This is low carbon electricity, and it's only low carbon because it requires some concrete upfront. It's 0 carbon during operation, and plant life will be 60 plus years. This is multi-generational jobs for individuals and for families, and this is just an excellent legacy for them to be leaving behind, particularly when they're transitioning from using oil, and exporting oil towards cleaner technologies like nuclear. So really excited to be there and to see, for a country that's a newcomer nuclear country. So the process to become a nuclear country is quite lengthy, and the IAEA supports this with, do you have the right infrastructure, regulation, system and framework in your country to actually build and maintain the skills and everything that you're going to need to do it. It's quite a lot. So I don't know how many years they've been planning and prepping for this, but it's taking a lot. And I think that one thing they can do is be this exemplar. They can say, this is the blueprint that we followed. This is how it was done. This is the effort that it took us, and share that with other countries that are considering nuclear in the near future. Last year we were in Egypt at COP27, and they had just poured the first safety-related concrete for the reactor base for their first nuclear reactor as well. So there are many countries that will, in the next 5 and 10 years, be nuclear countries. So this is really exciting. And for countries that have 0 nuclear, that are going, what does it take? Okay, I do want it. They can be like, this is what we did. This is the steps we took, and guide them through that and give them that confidence that it can be done. And you don't need to have started it back in the 1960s to make it a success now.
It definitely is exciting to see COP being hosted in a country where which did take that leap of faith and is showing signs of success, right? Yeah. So I think it will be phenomenal for the world to get together and see how nuclear power is producing that clean energy and can be used toward climate change goals. That's really remarkable. Also, when it comes to Dubai and this year's COP, are there certain initiatives or certain activities that are taking place that are different than the years before? And if so, how's Nuclear for Climate participating in that regard?
So, from my experience, so COP26 in Glasgow, there are exhibition centres in Glasgow that are close together, and they were kind of built up together with perhaps some tents in between so you could get around them. And for COP27, the same thing happened with there was some infrastructure there for a conference, and additional tents and things were made so we could have these pavilion spaces and negotiation rooms, and side event rooms. And for COP28 in Dubai, it's the Dubai Expo City that's going to be used, which is a purpose built conference center that's really large. So it'll be really exciting that we'll be going to something that's for this type of event and to see what we can do. So COP has a couple of different zones. So the blue zone is where the negotiations happen. That's where the world leaders are sitting in their circle, with their country name in front of them and negotiating what they're going to do to achieve the carbon targets, what funding they're going to be providing for loss and damages, what they'll be doing on adaptation, etc. And outside of that is also media and the pavilions and booths that we've spoken about. And to get inside that blue zone, you have to be accredited by the UN and be given a ticket. You can't buy a ticket. You have to be part of a country's delegation, so a government, or you have to be a accredited NGO, nuclear non-government organisation or intergovernmental organisation to access it. And Nuclear for Climate, fortunately, through our collaborative network, has access to be there and to be speaking to these individuals. But separately, there is the green zone, which is more public access and is for everybody. And we want to be absolutely present at both, and we're developing our ideas. So our team of 26 people now, we have an events and activities team, we have a communications team, we have a delegation management team, are all working really hard on developing their ideas of what they'll be doing before COP, online perhaps, virtual events, perhaps some competitions that they'll be running. And then when we're at COP, there'll be the formal events that we do that are like panel sessions, questions and answers, but lots of fun things like dressing up like polar bears and doing flash dances, flash mobs, things like this. Lots of things planned, lots of things going on in the background. And one of the big things that will be happening out there's a mobility section. I'm trying to remember what other section that there is. There are also like thematic days. So what each of the days at COP, the first 2 days are just the World Leaders Summit. And then the days are themed around perhaps energy, youth, gender equality, water, loss and damage, and all these different topics. And we will be explaining how does nuclear benefit and support all of these different topics, whether that's the UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, or whether it's a more general theme, like we're a youth-driven and youth-led network. We'll really be pushing to express what we're doing on Youth Day, and particularly with what we do in energy, we'll be wanting to promote that we want nuclear alongside renewables to replace fossil fuels. So the together is better, renewables and nuclear together on Energy Day, and trying to make a lot of noise on that day through different side events and activities.
Yeah, I appreciate that overview of the different zones and different activities that do take place. Honestly, it seems like a good mix between that impact on a government international level with those key stakeholders, and then that more of a public engagement and an activist engagement side of things, right? So I really like how there's a mix between the two, because both are equally as important. Would you say throughout the years of your attendance in Glasgow, Egypt, and now I guess UAE, we'll find out, have you seen a shift in the activism side of the coin, right? Have you seen people becoming more passionate about nuclear or more accepting towards nuclear?
In my experience, have been more accepting than I had expected at the beginning, on the overall. And then, yes, I've seen it change and grow from COP26 till now. But then being in different countries for each COP, they kind of political, climate, and even legal frameworks are different. So in terms of general activism, COP26 was much more active than COP27 in demonstrations. That might also be due to location. Sharm el-Sheikh is a resort area in Egypt, but Glasgow is a city centre. So outside of COP, every day there were mass protests and demonstrations about the climate, and there was the school strike on Fridays, Fridays for Future. So there was a walkout at COP, and people then took to the streets, and the activism was much more visible outside of COP. Perhaps at Sharm el-Sheikh, that wasn't as possible because the impact of that type of activism couldn't be had, outside of the conference centre where you're not in a city, so there aren't other people to engage with and to involve. Also, in Glasgow in November, the weather's okay to put your hood up and protest, but perhaps in Sharm el-Sheikh in November, it wasn't quite the weather for that sort of activity. I think it will be similar for COP27, for COP28, that there won't be as many protests out in public, but there are still ways to protest and demonstrate and have activism inside COP. The thing is, particularly in the blue zone, it has to be very controlled. We have world leaders, and you've got 40,000 people or upwards of 40,000 people together in a space. All the infrastructure has been put in place. So to do anything like activism, you have to seek permission from the UN to do that. However, that there is a process. You submit a form, you explain what you're going to do, where you're going to do it, and that's something that we did, and that's our flash mob, was our major activity last year. So at COP26, the Nuclear for Climate team, led by the UK YGN at the time, they rewrote Bonnie Tyler's song, I Need a Hero, with We Need Net Zero, which was just an amazing, really intelligent lyricist on the UK YGN team putting that together, and then getting a professional singer to sing that, record that for us, and then organising choreograph team and professional dancers to come and do that flash mob. That's something that then the COP27 team adapted that. So Generation Atomic, which is a nuclear advocacy group in the United States, we worked really closely with them. They're founded and run by a great duo of brothers, Matt and Eric. And Matt's got a real passion for fitness, and he spun the flash mob into more of a fitness class flash mob. And it was nuclear is fit for the climate kind of sense there. We applied to the UN. We would like to have this moment of activism and do this chant, dance, dressed up as polar bears, people dressed up as bananas, handing out bananas with information about banana equivalent dose that you receive if you live next to a nuclear power plant. Your equivalent dose after a year is smaller than if you ate one banana. Just trying to educate people. And that was, one, great fun. Two, why do we do this kind of like fun, silly stuff? Well, it gets the media's attention. There's 40,000 people at COP. That's great. Everybody else online watching the TV and back at home, how do we target them and actually spread what we're doing at COP and how important that is to everybody else by these kind of activities that get a lot of media attention? So that was a really great activity to do. We enjoyed it. We got such good response from it. In week 1, we repeated it for week 2. So we did the same thing with a new set of volunteers who were all energized, made sure they stretched well and hydrated well after.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to see those activities and also mindful of I guess the temperature, right, or the environment in Egypt at the time, right? Obviously, much more warmer than Glasgow, right? And sunnier. That's phenomenal, and it's fun to see like examples of bananas being used, right? Because they are radioactive, and to show that, hey, listen, this is something that is an everyday food item that everyone has across the world, and you can relate to it and kind of quantify that amount of radiation that is safe. So that's phenomenal. I know this in UAE. I do know that the general public is very supportive of nuclear energy, according to surveys and census data that's been collected. And the people of UAE really support these government-led initiatives. So what are you anticipating this year? What is your anticipation for the public's reaction?
I think the public's reaction will be great, and COP's an interesting scenario where if I think back to my time at COP in Glasgow, I barely spoke to another Glaswegian. I barely spoke to another Scottish person. So it's interesting when you're at COP, because it is such a global situation and event. There's the whole world is there, represented. So how much of the public will engage at COP changes each year as well. And I'll be quite interested to find out how many people from the UAE actually go to where they can go to, the green zone, how many of them engage with that. And for COP27, don't know how many people from Egypt actually attended the green zone. The one time that I went around the green zone, it was relatively quiet, and it's a lot of people who are already in the blue zone or traveling for COP that go there. But particularly COP hires a lot of people to support the event through hospitality, through security. And it's actually really great to speak to, the local community through the workers that work at COP as well. And that was one thing that was really great at both Sharm el Sheikh and in Glasgow, was just to speak to, your local individuals. What do they think about it? Many of them, they were like, oh yeah, nuclear, cool, love it. Others didn't know we did nuclear in the UK. What do we do? So it's really great actually to speak to everybody. And perhaps for them, some feedback that we received was like, people are so busy and really important people at COP that they're not stopping and chatting to all the security guards and the people that are helping you. If you're out at COP, you've travelled possibly halfway across the world, and you're maybe there for a full week. It can get tiring, and it can be a long day. But we, as a nuclear sector, we should be kind and be speaking to everybody. You don't know who's the next Nuclear for Climate advocate if you just spend 1 minute speaking to them.
It's great. It's great that you're finding ways to engage the local population as well, even though there may not be a lot of representation from them. Because it's really good to sometimes gauge the thoughts of those that may not completely be involved in any climate initiatives, and just get that true unbiased opinion.
Right? Just ask them. What do you think? And we hope to engage a lot with Baraka Youth Council this year as well. So we've reached out with them. We're speaking with them. So Baraka, the nuclear power plant that's just been built by ENEC, so the Emirati Nuclear Energy Corporation. So they have this Baraka Youth Council, all their young people, just like any YGN in any other, nuclear country. And we're like, what do you guys want to do? What are you guys doing at COP? How are you engaging with UAE government on what will they have at their pavilion? And we want to, collaborate heavily with them for events and activities. Many of them will be based in Abu Dhabi, which is a couple of hours drive from Dubai. So it'd be great, to get their lead. So what's their local voice? Because we have this global nuclear youth voice, but actually the host country, what's their point of view? What do they want to do? And getting them to actually say, do you know what we want to do? We want to do this. That's where we want to get to before November, where we kick off at COP. And actually, even before COP, there's a conference of youth which happens. The dates haven't yet been released for COP28, which is the one before COP28. And I really hope that Nuclear for Climate and groups like Baraka Youth Council can get to COI and go along and observe. We've never been to COI before as Nuclear for Climate. So this year we've actually recruited volunteers for specifically a youth team, and they're tasked with how do we get to COI? And if we can get there, what are we going to do? Are we going to just show up with t-shirts? Are we going to try and get booths? Are we going to run events? And then really, if we're going to do booth events, communications all about COI, we're doubling what we're doing, so we might need a much, much larger team when it comes to COP29 and beyond if we do choose to really lean into going to COI.
I love how the years of iteration that you've been involved with the COP conference, you can see that progress in terms of the years of iteration of Nuclear for Climate showing up to and being present, right, in terms of the delivery team. So that's phenomenal. I loved hearing all of your experiences being a part of the COP conference, being a part of the Nuclear for Climate and leading it, co-leading it. So this conversation has definitely been phenomenal. I would say, if is there any last message that you would love for the audience to hear?
Yeah, I think there's one thing I've not mentioned. I said the COP26 campaign was, net zero needs nuclear. Why do we say that? And what right have we got to say such a statement? So the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on climate change. And they're tasked with scientists from all around the world that look at the effect that climate change is having on the planet, and also the routes to mitigation that we can have. And the assessment report that was done, not the most recent one, but before that, had expressed that if we're going to meet net zero by 2050, any of the pathways that achieve that require an increase in nuclear power in the world. The most recent report that's come out is the assessment report 6, is a little bit quieter. At the moment, it's only the summary for policymakers that's been released, and nuclear is mentioned once, whereas for the one that was published a few years ago, it was mentioned 6 times in that policy summary. So while I see that we're growing and that nuclear is becoming more and more accepted and more widely spoken about in the public, it's not time to rest. It's not time to sit back and say this is a given. We will have more nuclear. It's fine. Everybody understands that we need it and we need to decarbonise now. In fact, we could have done it earlier, but we are where we are. It is not time to rest. It's time to keep speaking about it, particularly to policymakers and decision makers, and to have the confidence and to say, actually, if we do look at the data and we look at the science and we follow the science, we know that we need this. We know that without an increase in nuclear power in the world, we will not achieve net zero by 2050. And what's the effect of not reaching net zero by 2050? We know that there's lots of essentially these peaks. So once we pass them, it's not going to be easy to recover now, but it's going to be almost impossible to recover then. So we can't keep having these delay tactics of we'll do it later. The time is now. The time was probably several decades ago, but we can't just rest up and say we've done the nuclear advocacy thing, it's going to happen. We need to keep pushing and hold people to account and hold ourselves to account as well.
I love the optimism, and and for anyone that's interested in getting involved with Nuclear for Climate, how would you recommend someone do that? What are some of the opportunities to get involved there?
Yeah, so the delivery team, we started working in March, and we'll work right up until the end of the calendar year. But a couple of opportunities that will come up. So we will find ourselves with a big peak of things to do in the 1 month, 2 months before COP. And we'll need some extra hands of passionate people that want to support us, that perhaps couldn't come into the delivery team for a long period of time, but might have a few weeks spare, maybe during their summer if they're a student, or just some spare time in the months before COP, so August, September, October time. And we'll be launching a recruitment for a task force for people to say, actually, yeah, I have a week here, I have 2 weeks here, I can help you out. Give me a simple task that's got a simple description, I'll get it done for you. So particularly if you've got some passion on nuclear advocacy or generally on climate and you want to know more about nuclear, then you can join us through that. Then we hope that we'll have a large number of youth volunteers from across the world attending COP, and that opportunity to be a delegate will open up as well through the task force. So apply there first, and then later we'll put a call out across the world for people to go and advocate for climate, combating climate with decarbonisation using nuclear.
Phenomenal. So for those listening, great opportunities to get involved. Please do so. All the links will be in the description below. So thank you so much, Hannah. I really appreciate you coming on this podcast. So there you have it, folks. Hannah Fenwick.
Thanks, Osama.